everyone, my name is Faith LaRose. I am a social worker with the preschool autism team, the Child Development Clinic, located at the Sky Center here in Winnipeg. You're probably watching this video because your child recently had an assessment with Child Development Clinic and received a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. We do understand that that assessment can be a lot of information and very overwhelming. And so the purpose of this video is to provide a little bit of follow-up information from the appointment that you had with the doctor. Some of the things that we are going to talk about today include common sort of emotions and reactions to learning that your child has autism, a little bit about what autism is, and then lastly, we'll talk about some of the different resources and referrals that the doctor may have spoken with you about. Before we get started, I just want to mention a couple of quick housekeeping things. One is that if English is a second or additional language for you, YouTube does have the option of turning on subtitles in various languages, just in the settings below. So if that might be helpful, feel free to turn those on. And then the second thing I want to mention is that just below this video, there should be a link to a handout that I may refer to periodically. So that handout will have all the slides that we're looking at today, as well as some links to some of the other things that we're talking about. The first thing that I want to mention is this resource folder. So you probably received this either at the appointment that you had with the doctor, or maybe it was mailed to you with the assessment report and other documents. This folder just has a lot of different resources and brochures and information about different community organizations, as well as information related to autism. So I do encourage you to look through it when you are able to. One thing I do want to point out from this folder is this booklet called Understanding Autism Spectrum Disorder, which gives a good overview of autism and a lot of the maybe potential questions that you might have related to autism. And the second piece that I want to point out is this Autism Organizations and Resource List. So this is a double-sided page, so this just shows both sides. A couple things that I want to point out here are this section, which talks about autism websites. A lot of us do lots of our research online these days, and we're probably sort of Googling autism and whatnot before and after the assessment. And that's okay, we all do that. There's a lot of information about autism out there on the internet, and some of it is really good information, and then some of it is really not so great information. So if you're doing some online research, these might be good websites to sort of start with in your search. Another piece that I want to point out from this page is down at the bottom here, these parent support and advocacy groups, which we're going to talk about a little bit in some later slides. So the first thing that I want to talk about is common reactions to learning that your child has autism. This can be really overwhelming, a lot of information to process, and can come with kind of a wide range of emotions. Sometimes this diagnosis might have been very unexpected and feel very devastating for you. For some parents and caregivers, they may have sort of been anticipating this diagnosis and feel a little bit of almost relief to have some answers to what they've been experiencing with their child over time. And you may be experiencing very mixed emotions, both of these and anything else in the middle as well. Many parents worry about what this means for their child in their future, when they go to school, when they're an adult. And it's not uncommon to experience feelings of denial or grief throughout this process and after the assessment. If there's one thing I want you to take away from today, I want you to remember that this diagnosis does not define your child in any way or change who they are. They're still the same sweet kiddo that they were before you had the assessment, and have lots of wonderful qualities and strengths that are certainly to be celebrated. Whatever your reaction and whatever you're feeling, it's okay to feel what you're feeling right now. It can take time to be able to process this new information. So I encourage you to sort of be easy on yourself and give yourself the time that you need to process this. With this, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of support and some potential parent support groups or counseling that may be available. You may want to reach out to family, friends, and other networks of support. There are some parent support groups, including the Parent-to-Parent Cafe at Sky, as well as a Facebook group for parents of children with autism in Winnipeg. The information and links for these are in that handout in the resource folder that I was mentioning earlier. There's also some workshops for siblings offered periodically, and these are called SIB shops. We do know that this can impact the whole family really, and children may have siblings who are also processing this and learning. And so these workshops are offered sort of a few times throughout the year for siblings. Again, the details to look into when the next installment of this is in the handout that's attached to this video. You may wish to seek out some supportive counseling with a professional to talk through some of what you're going through. Some options for this may be if you do have extended health benefits through work. Some plans do offer counseling through an employee assistance plan, sometimes referred to as EAP. There's also some free and low-cost counseling through different community organizations, and a list and links to some of these are again in that handout that's attached to this video. St. Amant may have some counseling available as well to families that do become involved with their programs. And we'll talk about St. Amant a little bit more in some of the later slides. And lastly, you can certainly reach out to me. I'm the autism social worker with the Child Development Clinic. My name is Faith LaRose. My phone number is 204-258-6629. And my email is there as well, flarose@rccinc.ca. Sometimes the best thing that you can do to take care of your child is making sure to take care of yourself. And I know we talk about the importance of self-care all the time, but it is so important to make sure that you are taking care of yourself in order to be there the best that you can for your child. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about what autism spectrum disorder is. So some of you may already be fairly familiar with autism. You may know people in your family or community who have autism. You may have a certain vision in your mind of what autism is. And for some people, you may have never heard this term before until you had the appointment with the doctor. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk a little bit about what autism is. So with autism, there's sort of two main components. So the first is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction. And the second is restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. And we're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail in the next two slides. So in terms of persistent social deficits in social communication and social interaction, the first piece with this is deficits in social emotional reciprocity. So some examples of this might be kiddos who have a difficult time sort of engaging in a back and forth conversation with another person, answering questions. You may see that they don't necessarily respond when you call their name. The next is deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction. So they may have sort of poorly integrated verbal or nonverbal communication. You may see limited eye contact. They may have a difficulty using or understanding some of the gestures that we use in typical communication. And lastly, deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So sometimes we do see sort of a lack of interest in peers or wanting to play with other children. They may have difficulty with sort of sharing an imaginative play with others. One piece that I do want to mention here is that there is kind of sometimes a common misconception with autism where people may think or feel like my child can't have autism because they talk, and children with autism are nonverbal. And that's not always the case. While speech and language delays are very common with autism, there's also a lot of children with autism who do talk and are quite verbal, but it's more these social aspects of communication that are a bit of a challenge for them at times. So the second piece that we talked about earlier was restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. So there's a few pieces within this as well. The first is stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects, or speech. So you may see sort of a certain repetitive motor movement that your child engages in. Some children you may see sort of flapping their hands when they're excited. They may consistently walk on their tiptoes, lots of jumping, spinning, those sorts of things. They may have repetitive sort of speech or sounds that they make over and over. You may see them sort of repetitively lining up their toys in a specific way. They may be exhibiting lots of sort of echolalia, which is when they're just sort of repeating back what they're hearing other people say. The next is insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, or ritualized patterns of nonverbal behavior. So some examples of this might be sort of becoming extremely distressed with any small change, a lot of difficulty with transitions, some very sort of rigid thinking and things needing to be a very particular way. They may sort of need to do some of the same things the same way every day. So eating maybe the same foods or needing to take the same route somewhere every day are some examples of this. Next is highly restricted fixated interests with abnormal intensity or focus. So they may be strongly preoccupied with some unusual object or something in their environment. They may have very perseverative interests on certain things or certain objects as well. And lastly, hyper or hyporeactivity, so over or under reactivity to sensory input or unusual interests in sensory aspects of the environment. So this is where some of those sensory challenges come in that you may have heard of with autism. So things like having really adverse responses to certain loud noises or textures. They may sort of insist on touching or smelling everything that they put in their hands or putting everything in their mouth. They may have sort of visual fascinations with certain things like bright lights or things that spin, all of those sorts of things. Autism is considered to be a spectrum disorder, meaning that there's a wide range of variation in how individuals with autism may present. In some of the slides that we were talking about before, some of those things you may really see with your child, and other things maybe not as much. When we say that there's a spectrum, there's sort of some kiddos who have lots and lots of challenges and difficulties with those things, and then some who may have very few. And a common question that I get, or what you may be wondering, is where is my child on the spectrum? And that's a really tricky question, especially because your kiddos are so young at this point, and there's a lot that goes into that. So it's not something that the doctor typically indicates at this age. Autism is typically considered to be a long-term diagnosis. Well, we'll certainly expect your child to continue to develop and make progress over time. It is something that's generally considered to be lifelong and not something that we would expect them to fully grow out of. And lastly, it's not fully understood right now what causes autism. Research on this is definitely ongoing, and it's believed that there may be sort of a number of factors at play, including some genetic pieces and environmental factors, but the cause of autism is not really fully known or understood at this time. It is something that your child would have been born with and not something that you caused as a parent in any way. And so you're probably thinking, okay, what now? Many parents feel overwhelmed about what comes next and want to focus on whatever they can do to support their child's development. I want you to remember that your child is more like other children than different from other children. And what they need most are all the things that all children need, like love, support, nourishment, friends, family, routine, and opportunities to play and explore. And don't underestimate the importance of play. Taking time to get down on the floor and play with your child in creative and interactive ways can certainly promote their social and cognitive development. Especially over things like playing on sort of iPads or screens, because when children are playing on those things, they're not necessarily engaging with another person or working on those social skills that can be more challenging for them. So it's really important to play with your child and engage with them as much as you can. And while many parents feel compelled to take on the role of therapist for their child, don't forget your main job is to be mom or dad or grandpa or grandma or foster parent or whatever you are to that child, and that is what they need the most from you. There are some recommended therapies that may be available, and so we're going to talk about some of those in the next few slides. So the first is speech therapy. So speech therapy is a typically recommended therapy with autism. Now your child may or may not already be connected with a speech therapist through Children's Therapy Initiative. The speech therapist works with you and your child on strategies to support further language, communication, and social development. A couple things I want to mention is that if you are connected with a speech therapist but you haven't heard from them in a while, don't hesitate to reach out to them instead of waiting for them to reach out to you. You can certainly give them a call and see if you can book another appointment or if you do need a new referral. And if you do need a new referral, we'll talk about in the next point that you can self-refer. The other thing I want to mention with speech therapy is that a lot of times the speech therapist is working more so with you as a parent to learn strategies and ways to incorporate some of these things into your day-to-day life with the child. So if your child is preschool age and not yet connected with a speech therapist, you can self-refer through Children's Therapy Initiative Central Intake. The contact number for that is 204-258-6550. And the link for the referral form is in the handout that's attached to this video. Now, if your child is school age, speech therapy is typically offered through the public school system, and you may wish to discuss this further with your school team. Now, if your child is not eligible for the above speech therapy options, or you would like more speech therapy than what's available, you may wish to seek out private speech therapy, but I just want to note that this would be at a cost to you. You might want to see, so some extended health plans that parents may have through work may cover a portion of this cost. So you may want to see if you do have any extended health benefits through work and if it may cover some of this. And if this is something that you're planning to seek out, the link for the directory of speech therapists in Manitoba is in the information, again, the handout that's attached to this video. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about occupational therapy. So this is also often a recommended therapy with autism. And some of the things that occupational therapists look at include fine motor skills, feeding concerns, adaptive play skills, self-care skills, peer interactions, sensory processing, and delays in development. When we talk about self-care skills, so those might include things like getting dressed, eating, hygiene, toilet training, all those kinds of things. Now, if your child is preschool age, they may be eligible for occupational therapy through Children's Therapy Initiative, and they may already be involved with an occupational therapist or be on the wait list for occupational therapy. I do want to mention that the wait time for occupational therapy through Children's Therapy Initiative is quite long. It's about 18 to 24 months at this point, and this is only available until children start kindergarten. If you do want to check if your child is on the wait list for occupational therapy or would like to self-refer, you can contact Children's Therapy Initiative Central Intake at 204-258-6550. And again, the referral form for this, if you do want to self-refer, is also in the handout that's attached to this video. Now, if your child is school age, they may be eligible for occupational therapy through the public school system, and you may want to discuss this with your school team. If you're on the waiting list for occupational therapy or would like to receive more occupational therapy than what is available to you through the public system, you may wish to seek out private occupational therapy. Now, again, note that this would be at a cost to you, but I again encourage you to see if you have any extended health benefits through work that may cover a portion of this cost. And the link for the directory of private occupational therapists in Manitoba is, again, in the handout that's attached to this video. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about Play Matters. So your child may have been referred to the Play Matters program at the Child Development Clinic. During a Play Matters session, parents are provided with ideas of how to use play to engage with their child. And through play, a child with autism can learn communication and coping skills by watching and responding to an adult's actions. And these help children to expand on their own interests, develop self-control, and feel a sense of accomplishment. And all of this is achieved while learning to connect with others and develop relationships in a fun and safe way. So typically up to 3 Play Matters sessions are offered. And the early child development facilitator who facilitates this program, her name is Sarah Negus. You may have had contact with her already, or she should be in touch with you in the coming weeks to offer an appointment. Or you can reach out to her at 204-258-6608. Next, we're going to talk about the Autism Parent Information Session and preschool age autism therapies. So I just want to highlight this page that's also in that blue resource folder that we talked about at the beginning. This talks about that Autism Parent Information Session in more detail. And on the back, it has the upcoming dates. So these are offered once a month. So you just have to sort of see which ones are coming up and which one might fit into your schedule. So if your child is preschool age, we encourage you to register for the parent information session that outlines the 2 public preschool age autism programs in Manitoba. So these are the St. Amant Early Learning Program, which is an ABA therapy program, as well as Winnipeg Autism Outreach. So these parent information sessions, I think I mentioned, are held virtually once a month. To register for this, you need to contact Natalie Pollinchuk at 204-256-4301, extension 3443, or you can email her at npollinchuk@saintamont.ca. So this session will provide more information about the St. Amant Early Learning Program and Winnipeg Autism Outreach. From there, you can decide if you would like to apply, and you would need to submit an application to each of the programs that you're interested in. One program is not better than the other, they're just different. And so that's why we encourage parents to attend the information session to learn more about them. And then they can see if there's one that sort of feels like a better fit for them and their child and their family. If this is something that you're considering, we recommend attending the information session and submitting the applications as soon as you're able, because both these programs will have waiting lists as well, and are only available until children start kindergarten. I just want to note you do have the option of applying to both programs, but you can ultimately only receive services from one of them. So some parents do choose to put in applications to both and just take whichever one comes first. Some parents, after attending the information session, do have a preference about which one they think is a better fit for them and choose to only apply to one, and that's entirely up to you. And then I also just want to mention that the St. Amant ABA program is offered in the rural areas outside of Winnipeg. Next, we're going to talk about Children's Disability Services, which is commonly referred to as CDS, and their child development service. So at your appointment, the doctor may have discussed CDS with you a little bit. This is a government program that provides services to families of children with disabilities. If you provided consent, the doctor will have already done this referral and you don't need to do anything at this point. CDS will be in contact with you in the coming months, typically first with a letter, and then a few months after that, either they'll send you another letter to get in touch or they'll give you a call. So if your child is preschool age, CDS will assign you a child development specialist, which can work with you as well as potentially your child's daycare or preschool on any goals you may have related to your child's development. And I just want to point out this brochure that's also in that blue resource folder that talks about this child development services service in a little bit more detail. Once your child is school age, they will instead assign a case manager who you can contact with questions regarding services, provide advocacy and support, attend school meetings, and potentially some respite and behavioral support if eligible. So typically myself, as the autism social worker with Child Development Clinic, I'm usually sort of involved and available short term after the assessment until Children's Disability Services get started, because it does take them a little bit of time. And then they will take over sort of as your long-term contact. They can stay involved all the way up until your child is 18 if you'd like. I just want to point out this brochure as well, which is in that blue folder, which talks about children's disability services in a little bit more detail. And if you have questions about children's disability services, you can contact Darcy Brooks at 204-945-8311. Next, I want to talk a little bit about incontinence supplies. It's not uncommon for children with autism to at times take longer to toilet train. And so your kiddos may be using diapers or pull-ups and wipes, and there may be some funding for this now. So if your child is 3 years or older, you are the legal guardian, and you have received your eligibility letter in the mail from CDS, you can request diapers or pull-ups and wipes to be provided through CDS. So the DHSU medical supplies form is the form required for this, and the link for this form is in the information attached. I just want to point out that because your child will have been determined eligible for CDS by the time you're applying to this, Section 2 does not have to be completed by a doctor, and you can complete and submit this form as parents. So this is what that form looks like. Just if we're looking through it a little bit. So at the top, you're going to want to check off the box that says Children's Disability Services. In Section 1, you're going to complete this with your child's information. Section 2, as I mentioned, does not need to be completed by a doctor. You are able to complete this form as parents. And then lastly, in Section 3, this is where you'll list whatever products your child uses, whether that's diapers or pull-ups, about how many a day they're using, what size they're using, as well as wipes if this is something you want to request as well. And then you can submit this to the Disability and Health Supports Unit at this address or fax number. So once you do that, once they've sort of processed it, they'll send you a letter in the mail just letting you know if it's approved with instructions on how to go about requesting your order each month. Now, if your child has treaty status, diapers or pull-ups would be provided by First Nations Inuit Health Grant instead, or FNIB. To do this, you would get a prescription from your family doctor or pediatrician and take it to your pharmacy, who would then submit a request to FNIB for funding. If you're the foster parent of a child in CFS care, you may want to speak with your CFS worker regarding incontinence supplies. Now, what about daycare? So participation in an early childhood program such as daycare or preschool can be very positive for children's social and emotional development, as it provides more opportunities for peer interactions and practicing social skills. If your child is not in a daycare program, but this is something that you're interested in, you may wish to start an account with the Manitoba Online Childcare Registry. And the link for this is in the information, or the handout attached to this video as well. And you can then add them to some wait lists on daycare or childcare centers in your area. We also recommend reaching out to these centers by phone as well. And note, most of these centers do have waiting lists. So if this is something, again, that you're considering, you may want to do this sort of sooner than later. If your child is already in a daycare or preschool program, you may wish to speak with the center about applying for what's called inclusion support if it feels like some additional support might be needed related to your child. Inclusion support would mean that the daycare themselves would apply to the government for extra funding for an additional staff person in the daycare environment to support a child with participating in the program. So this doesn't necessarily mean that it's someone to work one-on-one with your child, but it would be additional staff person in the daycare environment that would be available to work with your child as well as other children. Now, what if my child will be starting school soon? So this is a common question that I get, but children with autism generally attend regular school programs, just like any other child without autism. They may have more involvement with the school resource program or school therapies. They may have some work adapted to meet their needs, or they may have some additional support in the classroom environment if needed. If your child is eligible for school soon, we recommend registering for kindergarten at your catchment school as early as possible. This will allow for appropriate planning for your child. If your child is eligible to start kindergarten in September, the registration period typically starts around the February before, but it varies a little bit by school division. So we just encourage you to get in touch with your catchment school to find out about their registration process. And likely what will happen is around the springtime, they will schedule what they call an intake meeting with you to sort of talk about some of the plans for your child's transitions to school. And that's your opportunity to ask questions and explain the things that you think are really important for them to know regarding your child. It's up to you as the parent, but we typically recommend sharing the information about the diagnosis and the assessment report with the school if you're comfortable. The reason for this is that it just allows them to ensure that everything is in place to support your child as best they can in the school environment. When you meet with the school, you might want to ask about the availability of speech therapy or occupational therapy, as well as any other supports that school may have for children with autism. I also just want to highlight this section of that resource list that was in the blue folder, which we were talking about a little bit earlier, which has some additional links and resources related to the transition to school. Now, what if my child is already in school? So again, it's up to you as the parent, but we typically recommend sharing the information about the diagnosis and the assessment report with the school if you're comfortable. You may wish to find out if there's any speech therapy or occupational therapy available through your school, as well as any other supports they may offer for a child with autism. I just want to point out the only alternative for speech therapy and occupational therapy for school-age children outside of the school system would be private speech and occupational therapy that were mentioned earlier. You might also want to reach out to MATC. They might be able to provide some consultative support to the school team if it feels like it's needed. The contact number would be 204-958-9600. Next, we're going to talk about the disability tax credit. So the disability tax credit was likely mailed to you with the assessment report. This is optional. It's something that's up to you if you decide to submit, but it's something that's usually routinely offered by the physicians through the clinic. So with this, the doctor will have already completed the majority of this application. So the only thing that you need to worry about is just the front page. And then once you complete that, you can mail it into the Winnipeg Tax Center at 66 State Bond Road in Winnipeg. This address is also listed on the last page of the disability tax credit application. So the disability tax credit is a non-refundable federal tax credit that helps families supporting children with disabilities reduce the amount of income tax they have to pay. And it also makes you eligible for other benefits, such as the Child Disability Benefit, the CDB, and the Registered Disability Savings Plan, so RDSP. So the Child Disability Benefit can be quite helpful. That would add some additional funds onto your Canada Child Benefit, or CCB, that you may receive each month. This is also sometimes referred to as child tax. So if you're already receiving this and that your disability tax credit is approved, then you should see an additional amount on that each month under the Child Disability Benefit. And the Registered Disability Savings Plan, so that's a savings account for children who may have some additional needs, where any funds that you were to put into that savings account, the government would match up to a certain point as well. So if this is something that you're interested in, once you get your letter back from CRA confirming that the application was approved, you can take that letter to your bank and ask them about opening up this type of account. It usually takes, right now anyway, it's taking CRA about 6 to 8 weeks to process these applications. And then, like I mentioned, they'll send you a letter in the mail letting you know if it's approved. This is the disability tax credit application form. Now, I just want to point out a couple of things on here. So section 1 will likely be pre-filled with your child information when it's mailed to you. If your child doesn't have a social insurance number yet, that's okay. You can submit this form without a social insurance number for your child if they don't have one yet. Section 2 is information about the person claiming the disability. So probably you as the parent. It's up to you which parent you want to put this under. So you'll include the parent's social insurance number. The person with the disability would be your dependent, so your child under 18. Does the person that you're claiming the disability amount for live with you? So you would check off yes, and for what years? So presumably since the year they were born, unless they were not living with you for a period of time. Now, I get questions a lot about this section where it says, give details about the regular and consistent support you provide. I would say not to worry quite as much about what you put in this section, because typically more so what they're looking at is what the doctor has put in the later pages. But some of the things you might want to put in this section is anything that you might have to do for your child that might be sort of above and beyond what might be expected for another child their age. So things like needing consistent support with communication, needing additional assistance with toileting, having additional appointments with, say, speech therapy or occupational therapy or child development clinic. Those are all things that you could consider putting in that section, as well as anything else that you think might be important to mention. Under section 3, where it asks if you want them to adjust previous income tax returns, again, this is totally up to you. We usually sort of recommend saying yes, the reason being that if applicable, then they may provide some back pay from previous years. So again, that's up to you if you want to check off that box or not. And then lastly, section 4, you're just going to sign, put your phone number and the date that you completed this. And once you've done that, you can mail this off to the Winnipeg Tax Center at 66 Steep On Road. And again, the full address for that is on the last page of the disability tax credit application. I want to mention a couple of different sort of additional resources and organizations. One is St. Amant's Fulfilling Potential Workshops. So these are workshops offered by St. Amant for anyone who cares for or works with a child or individual with developmental disabilities or autism. Some of the topics that they cover include challenging behavior, teaching strategies, potty training, and an overall introduction to autism. These right now are being offered virtually a few times a year. And if you want to find out about an upcoming installment of these, you can contact April Plett at aplett@stamont.ca. I also want to mention the Sky RCC newsletters. So you can sign up for these on the RCC website. Again, the link for this is in the handout that's attached to this video. The sign up is about halfway down the page at that link. And it's up to you, but I usually recommend checking off the RCC Sky Family Network, the LIFE program, and the Specialized Communication Resources for Children newsletters, because all of these can have helpful information about things like the parent-to-parent cafe that we mentioned earlier, the SIB shops, recreational opportunities for your kids, like things like music therapy and yoga and different craft nights and that sort of thing, as well as various educational workshops for parents. I also want to mention Jordan's principles. So if your child is First Nations and has treaty status, you may wish to reach out to the Jordan's Principal Special Needs Advocacy Unit if you're here in Winnipeg, or the unit in your area, to find out if there might be any further supports available. So the contact number in Winnipeg is 204-987-4137. And lastly, I also want to mention Family Dynamics. So this organization has a number of different programs for families in the community, including some supportive counseling, some in-home family support, and a behavioral support for child care centers. The contact number for Family Dynamics is 204-947-1401. So you might be thinking, okay, this has been a lot of information. Again, what do I need to do now? So if your child is preschool age, you just ensure you're following up with your speech therapist and occupational therapist if assigned. If you're not sure if you've been referred to these or would like to self-refer, again, you can contact Children's Therapy Initiative Central Intake at 204-258-6550. You also may want to register for the Autism Parent Information Session regarding the public preschool age autism programs that we talked about. So to register for this, you contact Natalie Pollinchuk at 204-256-4301. Her extension is 3443, or npollinchuk@saintamont.ca. You may want to complete and submit the disability tax credit that we talked about in the previous slides. If your child is in daycare or preschool, you may wish to share the diagnosis and assessment report with the daycare and inquire about inclusion support if appropriate. And also reach out to any of the organizations of interest in the previous additional resource information slide. Now, if your child is school age, you may want to check with your school team to inquire if your child is receiving speech therapy or occupational therapy through school, or if these may be available. You may also want to complete and submit the disability tax credit. Again, you may want to share the information about the diagnosis and the assessment report with your school so that they can plan appropriately and ensure any supports needed are in place. And again, reach out to any of the organizations of interest in the previous additional resource information slide. So I do hope that that was helpful and hopefully provided some clarity to all the information that's sort of been coming at you in the last few weeks with this assessment. If you do still have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can contact me either by phone at 204-258-6629 or by email as well at flarose@rccinc.ca. So thank you for joining me today. I do hope this was helpful. But again, feel free to reach out to me if you do still have further questions. Thanks so much. Take care.